Hello, my name is Ikenna Nwaiwu, and today I'll be presenting to you on my talk, Improving API Delivery Outcomes. This is a brief agenda of what I'll be talking about. First of all, I'll start by talking about myself, introducing you to myself and the company I work for, 10x. And then I'll give a brief preamble into what I call APIOps. And then I will go into my talk proper, which is about how to improve the processes with which teams, organizations build their APIs. I'll present the main idea of this talk, which is something called A3 thinking, which is a process improvement method that teams can apply to the processes they use for building APIs. And I'll talk about the benefits and go into details of how you can actually use this in your teams to improve your API development processes. So with that review of the agenda, I'll start by talking about myself. I help teams who build APIs. I work in an API enablement role. So I help teams with API design review, help with the testing, the deployment of APIs, helping teams with the tools they need, the facilitation of processes they need to build APIs. I work with a company called 10x. We are a modern cloud-native core banking provider, and we work with global banks and help them launch financial products to their customers quicker, cheaper, and better. And so with that introduction, I'll talk about APIOps. What is APIOps? APIOps is the end-to-end automation of the API development lifecycle using GitOps and DevOps principles. It's a way to help teams build APIs better, more efficiently, and remove bottlenecks from their systems. There are 6 main principles I talk about when I talk about APIOps. The first is about using the design-first approach to building APIs. For teams building REST APIs with things like OpenAPI, this involves defining or designing APIs in OpenAPI first before building the API. And then the second principle there is to make sure those API definitions are stored in version control using Git or whatever your version control system is. And this is something that helps integrate it into CI systems, for example. And then third is about automating API standards compliance. This is to making sure that API designs match the organization's API style guide, making sure that API designs do not introduce breaking changes. So putting in automation into the CI/CD system to make sure that API designs are compliant with the organization's style guide. The fourth step is about API conformance testing, and this is putting in automated checks to make sure that the API definitions that are published to the dev portal that are released actually match what was designed. Okay, so having automated ways to check that what's released, what's deployed actually matches what was designed initially. The fifth is it's about storing API configuration in version control systems, the API gateway configuration, storing them in version control systems in a declarative way, which enables the sixth step, which is having automated ways to deploy that API configuration to the API gateway and applying it, being able to reconcile it, whether it's a push deploy of that configuration or some sort of pull system, whether it's using your CI/CD pipeline or GitOps tools like Flux, like Argo CD to pull those configuration into your API gateways in a way that it gives you auditability that you get with your version control systems and help you deploy reliably each time. These 6 principles are what really APIOps about, and really it's a way to help teams really automate their API delivery so that they can actually focus more on designing great API products for their consumers. Okay, having given you that introduction to APIOps, What I want to talk about is improving API delivery outcomes. Now, APIOps is really a way to improve the overall process around which teams build APIs. But I want us to take a step back and look at the whole process for building APIs and how we can improve that. One of the things teams, many API teams have inefficient processes when it comes to delivering APIs. This leads to poor lead time for testing APIs, deploying APIs, reviewing APIs, and also poor quality outcomes. For example, API documentation defects. And these inefficient processes are just they happen. And so what happens is that teams try to improve their processes, and the way they do this sometimes is that they come up with a list of items of things to do to improve the process. This is something Mike Rother calls action item problem solving in his book, The Toyota Kata. Teams, in an effort to improve their processes, they come up with this list of action items. Each on its own is really good. We could do this. We could have a better API style guide. We could have a better tool for deploying our APIs. We could have a better API testing tool or whatever. And they come up with this huge list of things to do, which on their own sounds good. But overall, it can come up with quite an inefficient way to improve API delivery processes, and it can be quite overwhelming for teams as well. So the question is, how can you efficiently improve your API delivery process? And with that focus on efficiency, what ways can teams actually use to improve their end-to-end delivery of their APIs? And that's the point of this talk. I want to present something called A3 thinking. A3 thinking is a better way for teams to use to bring about continuous process improvements, and has loads more benefits, or loads of benefits compared to just walking through an unending list of to-do items that teams need to do. There are three main areas I'm going to discuss here. The first is I'm going to point out some of the problems teams have with this action item problem solving, this list of problems to walk through. And then I'm going to talk about what A3 is and how it's an alternative and provides benefits, improvements over the action item approach to problem solving. And then finally, I'll talk about how to use A3 thinking in detail on your project. And so let's start with the problems that happen with action item problem solving. Action item problem solving is about coming up with a list of actions, like I said, for process improvement. First of all, teams usually observe a process problem, and then they come up with this list of actions to resolve it, and then they assign these actions to a member of the team or specific teams to kind of walk through. Okay. And that's a simple approach. But what's wrong with this approach? It looks so simple, straightforward. What's the problem with it? Well, it has the following issues. First of all, it can be quite unscientific and scattershot. Okay, so we're doing all these improvements. But how do we know the improvements that would give us the best bang for our buck, so to speak? How do we know the improvements that will give us the big changes in the quality, the specific improvements in quality, in delivery, in lead time that we're looking for, if we just have this huge list of kind of to-do items to walk through? The second thing is that it can lead teams to jump to solutions without really understanding the wider context, the end-to-end context across multiple streams, across the value stream, across the workflow of what that solution may mean for other teams or for them. So it does lead to jumping actions because something looks like a good idea for a localized team. And that leads to the third point, that it can lead to local optimization. Local optimization is when we are implementing solutions at a local level that actually lead to a global deterioration in quality or lead time across the whole process. So this action item approach does have several problems, as I've listed. But there's an alternative which I want to present, which is A3 thinking. There's a better way. There's a better way than this this action item approach to solving problems. And I like to put forward the A3 thinking as a way to do that. A3 thinking is a visual and iterative problem-solving method that incorporates a continuous dialogue with colleagues. A3 thinking comes out of Toyota, and some of the techniques developed there around continuous improvement. It's actually a one-page report based on the plan, do, study, act cycle. And I'm going to show you talk more about that in more detail. But A3 thinking does provide several benefits over methods teams typically use. First of all, it's logical and objective, and it's really based places a lot of focus on using data to drive improvements. Second, it adopts a systems view, and so it uses systems thinking. It does apply systems thinking in getting an end-to-end, trying to understand the end-to-end impact of improvements. And it's an efficient way to present information and does help drive team alignment. So, given that context of the problems teams have with kind of the traditional approach of action item problem solving and introducing A3 as an alternative to problem solving and process improvements, especially to do with the API delivery process, let's go into detail about how you can use the A3 problem solving in your team. Like I said, the A3 thinking is a visual and iterative problem solving method. You can see the template on the slide. It has about 8 main sections, which I'm going to talk through. You can draw this template up using your favorite diagramming tool, whether that's Lucid Chart, or Miro, or whatever is your favorite diagramming tool. You can even use a piece of paper. You can use an A3 size sheet, which is actually where the A3 name comes from. Just using an A3 size sheet and drawing, using a pencil and drawing these sections on them. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the main sections of this A3 report in turn. It starts by specifying the problem owner at the very top. Remember, this is a report you could use to have a discussion with your manager or with stakeholders or other team members. So at the very top, it starts by specifying the problem owner. The problem owner is the person who is accountable for doing the change. It's the person who has the influence to actually drive the change in the organization. It also has a date, which says it's also, the date says like a way to version the report really, because every time you update the report, you need to update the date. Yeah, you start with the problem owner and the date, and then the theme of the improvement, the subject of the improvement you want to make. Say, for example, for an API team, you want to improve the API consistency to make sure designs actually match are closer to your API style guide. That can be improvements. Improvements are things you want to improve or reduce. You want to reduce the number of API defects. That can also be a theme. Following on from defining the problem owner and the date, the next thing, and the theme, the next thing you want to do is provide the background. Here you give the context to the reader of the report of the changes of the you give the reader of the report the context they need to understand of why you need to make this change and why it's important to do that change now. This is a point where you can align, you can give details of how this problem or this improvement aligns with some wider organizational goal, some departmental goal, or you can give some history of some other work that's been done in this area in the past. You just give enough information in this area so that anyone reading the report understands why they need to solve this problem and why they need to solve this problem now, and any information they need to really understand the background of the problem. Next, you go into the current conditions. The next step, having provided the background, is to describe the problem, is to come up with a problem statement in 1 or 2 sentences, but very importantly, to describe the current conditions. Here, this section really emphasizes observation. going to see the problem occurring, talking with colleagues who are familiar with the problem, getting estimates or data, hard data on the frequency of occurrence on the problem. If there are API defects, how many, what's the frequency, where does it occur, getting that data. This is very data focused, and you can present that data using diagrams, histograms, pie charts, Pareto charts, bar charts, or workflow sheets, whatever is useful in a graphic way to quickly and efficiently present data, not using reams of text or paragraphs, but really to summarize a problem quickly so that the reader can understand what the problem is. Step 4, following that, having defined the problem, is to define the goal, is to specify the metric you want to use to improve your API process. For example, if that's API consistency, what is coming to agreement on what metric you'd like to use to define that improvement, describing what that metric is today, what you want it to be with the improvement. Say you're looking for a 10% or 20% improvement, or whatever that is, writing out the current condition and the target condition goal and the time frame for which you want to drive that improvement. The step following is to come up with a root cause analysis. Here we use something like the 5 whys approach to really dig into why the problem occurred in the first place. This is a really good way to understand the wider context of why this problem is happening in the system, in the complex system within which this is happening, and that really helps solving, because when we resolve the root cause, we really stop this and related issues from happening again. And it also helps us come up with a hypothesis for why this happened, and that's a really powerful tool to stop this and similar problems happening in future. The 6th step is to come up with countermeasures. This is where we really get into the meat of coming up with countermeasures, with actions to resolve the problem. This involves brainstorming, talking with colleagues, and can I just mention all the sections so far involve continuous discussion with colleagues, with your manager, to really have that dialogue going all through this report, through frequent meetings and things like that. In the countermeasures section, we come up with a list of actions that can resolve the problem, and we choose the ones we want to implement. And then in the target conditions, we draw a diagram that would explain how our process would look like after the countermeasures have been implemented. Following on from that, we talk about how following on from that, we need to then go and implement the countermeasures and see if they actually deliver the improvements we wanted. When we've done that, we can come and we can fill the effect confirmation section, where we take the results before and after along the metric we want to improve and see whether our countermeasure delivered the improvement we wanted. This way, we are really tying the results to the improvement, and we're seeking to learn whether what we did had any effect. This is a time to learn. This is a time to have discussions. This is a time to evaluate the improvement itself and what difference it made to the system. And then finally, we come up with follow-up actions. If the improvement delivered results, we want to see how we can roll out those results wider. Say we did API, we introduced API linting for one API, and that was effective. Can we roll this out to more APIs? Can we share this learning wider with the organization? The follow-up actions are where to capture those things we can do to really share the learning and to roll out the changes, the improvements wider in the organization. And so, yes, I've gone through this process and highlighted the 8 main sections of the A3 report. Again, I'm just going to mention them again: the theme, the background, current conditions and problem statement, the goal statement, root cause analysis, followed by countermeasures and target conditions, effect confirmation, and follow-up actions. As you can see, this is an objective and logical problem-solving approach. Throughout filling this report involves continuous dialogue with colleagues, and it really helps understand the wider context, the systems view, the root cause of why these problems is happening, making sure the countermeasures address the root cause. It's a great problem-solving approach teams can consider when doing things like APIOps and rolling out the APIOps transformation. And so I really hope you consider this in your transformation and APIOps transformation journey. I do want to talk about my book, Automating API Delivery, where I go into details, technical details on how to how to implement APIOps for your organization, and also how you can use things like the APA3 report to guide that implementation, to make sure that you're not just implementing technology, but it's actually delivering value for you, measurable outcomes for you in terms of your lead time and quality and so on. If you want to learn more about A3, here are a few more resources you can consider. A3 Thinking by Dorward Sobek is a great resource, and Managing to Learn by John Shook is another great resource you can consider in this. I hope you find these ideas useful. Thank you very much for listening.